At 9 a.m. on June 29, 1995, employees at the Sampoong department store in Seoul noticed cracks in the ceiling of the 5th floor. The manager was informed. The store stayed open. By noon, the cracks had widened. The 5th floor ceiling was sagging. The store stayed open. At 5 p.m., the sounds started, deep, structural groaning from the building itself. The executives met. They ordered the air conditioning units on the roof to be turned off to reduce vibration. They did not evacuate the building. At 5:50 p.m., staff finally sounded an alarm. At 5:52 p.m., the roof collapsed. The support columns failed. In less than 20 seconds, the entire south wing of the 5-story building pancaked into the basement. 3,000 people were inside. 502 died. 937 were seriously injured. The last survivor was pulled from the rubble 17 days later. Until the September 11th attacks, the Sampoong collapse was the deadliest non-deliberate building collapse in modern history. And the people who ran the building knew it was going to fall. They knew all morning. They kept the doors open anyway. The Sampoong department store was not supposed to be a department store. It was designed as an office building. The original plans, approved by Seoul city authorities in the late 1980s, specified a 4-story commercial office structure in Seoul district, one of Seoul's most affluent neighborhoods. The site was built on what had previously been a landfill, a geological fact that would prove significant to what the foundations could bear. Before construction was complete, Lee Jun, the chairman of the Sampoong Group, decided to change the building's purpose. An office building in Seoul district was valuable. A department store in Seoul district, serving the affluent residents of one of Seoul's fastest-growing neighborhoods, was more valuable. The conversion from office to retail required structural modifications. Retail space needs open floors without the columns that office buildings use. Columns were removed, including support columns that the original structural design had specified as load-bearing, to create the open floor plans that retail display requires. The contractors who were asked to remove the columns refused. They said it was structurally unsafe. Lee Jun fired them. He hired contractors who would do what he asked. The columns were removed. The building was converted to a department store and opened in July 1990. By 1993, Lee Jun wanted to add a 5th floor. The original design had specified 4 floors. The building's structural capacity, already compromised by the column removal, had been calculated for 4 floors. Adding a 5th floor would increase the load on a structure that had already been weakened beyond its design specifications. The city rejected the permit application for the 5th floor. Lee Jun added it anyway. The addition was built without permits. The construction used concrete that investigators would later find to be below the minimum specifications required by Korean building code, the specific material failure that would eventually be identified as a primary contributor to the collapse. The 5th floor was completed. It was given over to restaurants, 8 restaurants with heated floors. Heated floors add weight. Restaurants add equipment. The 5th floor, built without permits on a building that had already been illegally modified, was now carrying the load of 8 commercial kitchens above a structure that had been compromised at its foundation. In 1993, the rooftop air conditioning units, heavy industrial cooling equipment, were moved from their original location to a position directly above the south wing of the building. They were not lifted and lowered by crane. They were dragged across the roof. The dragging cracked the roof. The additional weight of the relocated units, placed directly above a section of the building that was already carrying more load than its weakened columns could safely support, added the final element to what structural engineers, examining the building after the collapse, would describe as an inevitable failure waiting for a trigger. The warnings came years before the collapse. In 1991, cracks appeared in the ceiling of the 4th floor. Internal Sampoong engineers reported them to management. The cracks were attributed to the 5th floor construction and monitored. They were not repaired. By 1993, the building had begun to visibly settle, an uneven sinking that structural engineers would later identify as evidence that the foundations were responding to a load they were not designed to carry. In April 1995, a structural engineering firm hired by Sampoong to inspect the building issued a report. The report said the building was at risk of collapse. The report recommended immediate closure and structural reinforcement. Sampoong did not close the building. Sampoong did not reinforce it. The report was filed. If this history is new to you, subscribe to Unsolved East and hit like. New episodes every week. June 29, 1995 was a busy Thursday. The Sampoong department store served approximately 40,000 customers per day. On a Thursday in late June, the building would have been well populated through the afternoon. Shoppers, staff, restaurant customers on the 5th floor, the ordinary rhythm of a busy retail complex in one of Seoul's most affluent neighborhoods. At approximately 9 a.m., employees on the 5th floor noticed cracks in the ceiling. The store manager was informed. The 5th floor was partially closed, customers were moved away from the cracked area. The rest of the building continued operating. Through the morning, the cracks widened. At noon, the sagging in the 4th floor ceiling had become visible enough that the upper floors were shut. The lower floors continued operating. At approximately 4 p.m., a structural engineer was brought in to examine the cracks. He recommended immediate evacuation. The Sampoong executives did not evacuate the building. They consulted among themselves. The specific calculation they made, between the financial cost of closing a busy department store on a Thursday afternoon and the structural risk that their own engineer had just assessed, produced a decision to continue operating with reduced access to the upper floors. At approximately 5 p.m., the building began making sounds. Deep, structural sounds that employees later described as the building talking, groaning, shifting, communicating in the specific language of a structure under load it cannot carry. The executives met again. They ordered the rooftop air conditioning units turned off. Before leaving the building, they removed the store's financial records. They saved the accounting. They did not evacuate the customers. At 5:50 p.m., employees finally sounded an alarm. At 5:52 p.m., a support column on the 5th floor failed. The failure propagated, one column failing adding its load to the adjacent columns, each failure producing the next, the specific engineering process called progressive collapse moving through the south wing faster than anyone inside could respond. In less than 20 seconds, the entire south wing of the 5-story building collapsed into the basement. 3,000 people were inside. The building did not fall outward. It fell down, each floor pancaking onto the floor below it, the weight of 5 stories of concrete and steel and contents and people compressing into a space that had been a basement. The people who were on the lower floors when the upper floors arrived on top of them had no time. 20 seconds. The rescue operation that followed lasted 17 days. Emergency responders, firefighters, police, military personnel, and civilian volunteers worked continuously through rubble that was structurally unstable, in summer heat, through aftershocks and the risk of further collapse. The last survivor pulled from the rubble was Park Sung-hyun, who was found alive on July 15, 16 days after the collapse, in a void in the wreckage. She was a 19-year-old shop assistant. She had survived on small amounts of water that had collected in the debris. She had been in the dark for 16 days. She survived. 503 others did not. Lee Jun, chairman of the Sampoong Group and the man who had ordered the column removal, the illegal 5th floor, and the decision to keep the building open on June 29 despite multiple warnings, was arrested within days of the collapse. His son Lee Han-sang, who had managed the building's operations, was arrested alongside him. The criminal proceedings moved with relative speed for a case of this complexity. On December 27, 1995, Lee Jun was convicted of criminal negligence resulting in death. He was sentenced to 10 years and 6 months imprisonment. On appeal, his sentence was reduced to 7 years and 6 months. His son received 7 years. 2 Seoul district city planners who had accepted bribes to overlook the building's structural violations were convicted and imprisoned. The specific calculation those sentences represent, the lives of 502 people, the serious injuries of 937 more, the 17-day rescue operation, the 16 days that Park Sung-hyun spent in the dark, has been discussed in Korean legal and civil society circles in the years since. The sentences were not universally regarded as sufficient. The building code reforms that followed Sampoong were significant. South Korea comprehensively revised its construction safety regulations, its inspection protocols, and its enforcement mechanisms. The specific combination of factors that had allowed an illegally modified building to operate for years despite documented structural warnings became the foundation for a reform program that changed how construction safety was regulated in Korea. The reforms mattered. They did not prevent Seoul. They did not prevent Itaewon. The specific pattern that Sampoong established, the gap between what is known about a risk and the decision to accept that risk rather than bear the cost of addressing it, is the pattern that this channel has documented across 3 separate Korean tragedies in the space of 30 years. Sampoong in 1995. Seoul in 2014. Itaewon in 2022. Each time, people knew. Each time, they decided the cost of acting was higher than the risk of not acting. Each time, they were wrong. The question of whether the next time will be different is the question that the pattern of these 3 cases, taken together, does not allow easy optimism about. The Sampoong department store south wing collapsed in less than 20 seconds. In the specific engineering sense, the collapse was the result of a progressive failure, one column giving way, the load transferring to adjacent columns, those columns failing in sequence, the specific cascade of structural collapse that engineers model, and that the Sampoong building, with its removed columns, its 5th floor, its relocated air conditioning units, and its inferior concrete, was set up to produce. The collapse was not a surprise. It had been predicted by structural engineers months before it happened. It had been warned against by the contractors who were fired for refusing to remove the load-bearing columns. It had been communicated by the building itself, in the cracks of 1991, in the settlement of 1993, in the groaning sounds of the afternoon of June 29, 1995. The building said everything it could say. The people who were responsible for listening heard it and calculated that the cost of closing was higher than the risk of staying open. 502 people paid for that calculation. Park Sung-hyun spent 16 days in a void in the rubble before rescuers found her. She was alive. She had survived on water that collected in the debris. She had been in complete darkness. She did not know, in those 16 days, whether anyone was looking for her. They were. They found her. The building is gone. The site was redeveloped? An apartment complex stands where the south wing collapsed. The people who live in it know the history of their address because in Seoul, that history is not hidden. The building said what it had to say. It was not listened to. 20 seconds.